Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 21 here on the Inner Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Enoch Fossum. I'm currently in my master's degree to become a licensed marriage and family therapist with an emphasis on addiction. And in this episode, we're talking about the two different types of pain that you can feel when it comes to pornography addiction. And really, at the end of the day, any different kind of addiction. So, let's get into it. Before we fully jump into it, you already know that we are going to do a little meditation exercise. If this is not something that you're into, that's totally fine. Just skip 2 minutes ahead. I'm going to try and make this a little bit shorter so that we can just jump right into that nitty-gritty. So first, take a deep breath with me, will you? And if you're just starting your day, let's start it off right. So I want you to think back real quick. When's the last time that you had an urge to watch pornography? Was it last week, yesterday, an hour ago? And then think to yourself, what did you actually do when you had that urge? What was your initial thought? Did you not think anything of it and just go PMO? Or did you actually think for a minute and say, wait a second, I remember when I promised myself that when I had an urge, I would do something, whether that is get up, go get a drink, take 10 deep breaths, whatever it was. Now, did you actually do that? If you did, amazing. That's what I'm talking about. That's what we're trying to do. And if you didn't, that's okay. Take a deep breath. You'll get it next time. But I want you right now to commit to yourself to do something next time you have an urge outside of PMOing. Do something that is going to be actually helpful, which is things like taking 10 deep breaths, going to get a drink of water, calling a friend, sending a text to a friend saying, hey man, I'm really struggling right now. Obviously, if this friend knows that you're struggling with porn. If not, that may come off a little strange for the first time that you tell them. But hey dude, if it works, do it. So commit to yourself to actually do something when you have an urge. And then next time you do have an urge, do that thing. And remember, the goal with these is not to PMO, right? The goal is to actually do what you set out to, which is take a drink of water, walk, take 10 deep breaths. That's the goal. If you do those, and then you end up PMOing later in the day, take a deep breath. It's okay. What we're trying to do is help our brain relearn what to do when we have an initial urge. Because right now, the trained brain, your brain, is saying, hey, when I get an urge, what do? We go PMO. That's just what we do. We've been doing it for a long time. And so we want to put on the brakes a little bit, use that prefrontal cortex, and say, hold on a little bit. Let's actually take a step back, and let's go get a drink of water. Do that, and then it's a win. All right, let's get into the pain. Now, there are two different types of pain we'll talk about today. One is the pain of presence, and two is the pain of absence. Some of you may have heard about this before, and if you have, great, amazing, and some of you may have not. And so hopefully you can learn something new today. Hopefully, regardless if you've heard of these two things today, you can take something away from this and actually learn something. I'm then going to relate it to acceptance and commitment therapy. This is my absolute favorite therapy modality right now, and I've been obsessed for a couple years now, and it's a lot of fun. If you haven't heard about acceptance and commitment therapy, it was founded by Stephen Hayes. And sorry, Stephen, my favorite ACT connoisseur right now is Russ Harris. He's the man. Listen to any of his books, go read any, and obviously stuff by Russ Harris is great too. But acceptance and commitment therapy is just the bomb, and I think it holds a lot of the key secrets into overcoming addiction, especially when it comes to pornography. So we're going to talk about the pain of presence and the pain of absence and how we can tie acceptance and commitment therapy into that. I know that I've talked about ACT in the past, so I'm going to refer to acceptance and commitment therapy as ACT, A-C-T, rather than saying it out every time. It's a mouthful. So I've done a couple episodes on this podcast, and if you go to my What About Therapy podcast, I've done with Austin a whole bunch of other episodes on ACT. So go over there and learn more about ACT. I'm definitely going to talk a lot more about it here on this channel as well. And so don't be afraid. Also, shout out to all my YouTubers that have been watching the show on YouTube. I've been actually getting a lot of support on there, which is actually really crazy. And it's really fun to see the subscribers go up, to see the views go up, different things like that. And so if you are watching on YouTube, go ahead, leave a subscribe. And I don't know, it just makes me happy whenever I say it. It's cool to see the followers on YouTube start to grow as well. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, just your regular podcasting platform, I see you too. Just know, I see you. You can always go to YouTube, though, and watch the video, or Spotify has the video as well. I don't know if Apple Podcasts will actually do videos. Anyway, I digress. So let's talk about the pain of presence. This pain of presence refers to things that are actually causing pain right now. So this is going to include things like painful thoughts, emotions, sensations, and memories. And your memories can also cause this whole chain reaction of different thoughts, emotions, and sensations. For example, things like anxiety, sadness, shame, guilt, or physical pain. Okay, so that's the pain of presence. And when it comes to pornography addiction, you're going to have a lot of pain of presence, right? After you PMO, how do you generally feel? Not that great. You experience things like sadness, shame, guilt, and did I say anxiety? Probably some anxiety. Thinking, oh my gosh, am I ever going to actually overcome this addiction, this thing that's been plaguing my life for however long? So, for example, the pain of presence can be something like I said, feeling shame after you PMO. Or when you wake up in the morning after a night of PMOing, how do you feel? Not great. Feel like a failure. Pain of presence. There you go. Or experiencing anxiety over getting an urge when you're on a hot streak, when you haven't PMO'd or looked at porn for, let's say, 2 weeks or a month. Then you may get an urge, and the anxiety can swell up, and that's pain of presence. So what's interesting is more people try to escape or suppress these experiences. I think it's really natural for us to try and fight it. In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, we need to remove that stinking thinking. You need to replace those negative thoughts with something better, right? We feel like we need to conquer. We feel like we need to control our emotions, or we're going to be controlled by our emotions. There's only really two options there. But in ACT, it teaches that struggling against your thoughts, can actually increase your suffering. So how many times have you had an urge? Let's say you get an urge in the morning, and it lasts all day. Maybe not the urge itself, but just the thoughts of, oh my gosh, I cannot PMO, I cannot go look at porn, I can't do it. We feel like we have to try and control these emotions with everything that we do. And that takes a lot of energy. And so, by the end of the day, what do you naturally do? Well, you PMO, because you spent all this energy all day trying to fight against it, trying to control it, so you're not controlled by that emotion. So in ACT, instead of struggling against it, ACT encourages acceptance, where you learn to actually make space for these experiences and emotions without actually letting them control your actions. One of my favorite analogies in ACT is the analogy of dropping the rope. So I've talked about this before. I forget what episode it is, but I'm going to talk about it a lot because it's baller. So the drop the rope analogy. Picture yourself. Close your eyes. Picture yourself standing across from this big old monster. I like to picture him like Sully, the big old blue guy from Monsters, Inc. That's who I'm standing across. And in between us is this big old hole. This massive, endless hole where if you fall, you just fall forever. All right? And connecting you and this monster is a rope. And what you're going to do with this monster is play tug of war. And so whoever pulls each other first into the hole wins. So this big old monster, Sully, he is these thoughts, emotions, and triggers that you fight on a daily basis when it comes to fighting the urge to watch porn. Now, when you do engage with these feelings, with these emotions, when you say, no, I can't replace it, happy thoughts, this is as if you're picking up the rope and you're playing the game. You're playing tug of war. with Sully. And the thing about Sully, man, is he's strong. And you are never going to win that tug of war against him. If you watched, what is it, the first Monsters, Inc., when he does 10 clapping push-ups or whatever, dude, he's huge. He's super strong. You could bench 500 pounds. No, Sully's still stronger than you. So whenever you try and fight these emotions and these feelings, you're engaging in this tug-of-war game with this monster that you can never beat. Impossible. So what do? If you can't win, what do you have to do? It's either you get pulled into the hole and you lose, or you end up giving in and you PMO. Or there's a third option when ACT comes into play, is we learn to drop the rope. Don't engage in it. You don't have to play this game. The monster, Sully, may be like, hey, you gotta play this game with me, or else what, right? We feel that we need to actually engage with these, but we don't. And so learning to just drop the rope and looking at Sully for what he actually is, which is just this big buffoon of a monster. And doing this takes a lot of practice. If you have an urge, you're not just going to close your eyes and pretend you're dropping the rope and bang, it's gone. That's not going to happen. It takes a lot of practice. And so with simple thoughts, you can learn to take a step back. Let's say you're a little nervous, or you may be a little anxious for the day, or, if work is stressful, whatever it is, practice dropping the rope. Take a step back, look at the monster, look at these feelings, anxieties, emotions, look at those anxieties, whatever that means. Take a step back, look at that for what it is, and accept it. Learn to actually feel it. And then, after you've accepted those emotions, after you've actually felt it, then that's when you want to make a value-based action. Take that feeling along with you, that feeling of anxiety, that urge, put it in your pocket and say, you can come with me while I go get a drink of water. You don't want to try and push it away. That's not going to be helpful either. So learn to accept it. The pain of presence needs to be accepted. And again, it takes practice, so be patient with yourself and practice. Now let's talk about the pain of absence. So this refers to the suffering that comes from avoiding what matters most to you, or the life you want to live but aren't living due to fear, avoidance, and psychological barriers. So this often happens when you prioritize pain over pursuing what's actually meaningful. So for example, avoiding relationships due to fear of rejection, leading to loneliness. So you're alone, you separate yourself, there's that absence, and that can cause a lot of pain because you feel lonely. Or another example, not applying for a dream job because of fear of failure resulting in stagnation. So you don't do it because of the fear. Or skipping family events to avoid social anxiety, causing disconnection. And I also like the example of you can feel pain of absence when you PMO at the same time that you're feeling pain of presence. Here's how. When you have pain of presence, what can that feel like, right? You have the guilt, the shame, all that stuff. But we can also have the pain of absence in this idea that the person that you want to be, the person who you're meant to become, is not in your life. It's absent. You aren't that person because of this addiction. And that can feel disheartening. It can feel really lonely. And that can cause pain of absence. So you can feel both pain of absence and pain of presence at the same time, which is wild. And that just compounds and just makes you feel worse, right? So in ACT, when it comes to pain of absence, the goal is to shift from avoiding pain to embracing value-based living. So in ACT, you got acceptance and commitment therapy. And ACT is huge on values. And so learning to understand what your values are and then making a decision, making an action based on that value. So even though pursuing what matters can involve discomfort, it ultimately leads to a fulfilling life. So this leads me to another point here. Is pain of presence bad? Or is pain of absence bad? Not necessarily. these different types of pains pains, is that even a word? Pains? Sure, we'll go with it. Those different types of pains can drive you to actually live a fulfilled life. But there's also more unhelpful feelings of pain, of presence, and absence, which is everything we've talked about, right? And so when we have pain of absence, we may have to experience some more pain of presence as we make a value-based action to go and start to become the person that we want to be. When you have an urge, think about this. When you have an urge to PMO, what would the best version of you do when that urge arrives? Think about that. What would he do? Or what would she do? Think about that as you go throughout this week. Think about what would your best version of yourself actually do if you had an urge. And then I want you to write some of those down and try and practice those. One of the fake it until you make it, which I actually do believe in. For a lot of things. Sure, some things maybe not. But fake it till you make it. Act how the best version of you would when you have an urge. And is that going to cause some discomfort? Is that going to cause some pain of presence? Absolutely it will. Because that's hard. Pun intended. It's really hard to do that. But the great thing is that you can do it. It just takes practice. So in ACT, with this pain, we first need to accept the pain of presence instead of fighting it. Learn to drop the rope against this tug of war that you can never win with Sully, with this big old monster. And then when it comes to pain of presence, learn to move towards a meaningful life to prevent the pain of absence from dominating your life. And will that bring some pain of presence? It will, but in more of a good way, to actually push you to be able to do things that you want, to live a more fulfilled life, to become that best version of you. So all of this is done through what's called psychological flexibility. I'm not going to go into that a whole ton, but look it up. I'm going to do another episode on that, don't you worry. Or you can go over to my What About Therapy podcast, and we have episodes about psychological flexibility. What this means is just being able to divert from the ways that you are stuck in. So for example, if you're addicted to porn, what's the main action that you do when you have an urge? You go PMO, and you're kind of stuck in that. And so we need to be more flexible and learn to change. And you can do that. You can have psychological flexibility by practicing things like mindfulness or diffusion, which is separating yourself from that unhelpful thought or dropping the rope, being able to look at that thought or emotion for what it actually is. We can also have values clarification and committed action. So by embracing both pain of presence and pain of absence, you can reduce suffering in your life and increase fulfillment. Because remember, both of these pains will not always be suffering. It's different. If you have pain of presence by making a value-based action and it's uncomfortable, that's good. I wouldn't call that suffering. So as you go throughout this week, I want you to think about a couple things. First, think about that goal that you're going to commit to do when you do have an urge. And it can be something as simple as getting a drink of water. I use that all the time, but it's that simple, really. Or focus on your breath. Take 10 deep breaths. And I want you to think about, when you have an urge, what would the best version of you actually do in this situation? And then write some of that down. And then use that as a tool to be able to help you know what to do when you do have an urge. Because you know what you need. You're the expert in your life. No one else can tell you what works for you other than you. You know what's best. You just have to actually think about it and go and find it. That's it. I hope you guys actually learned something new. If you did, I want to hear about it. Leave the comment down below if you're on YouTube. Sadly, you can't really comment on podcasts, so leave a review and you can write it in there. There you go. But again, if you guys wouldn't mind leaving a subscribe, please do it. Leave a like. And in the podcasting realm, leave a 5-star review and tell me about something that you like about the podcast or what I can actually improve and what are some things that you actually want me to cover on pornography addiction. I'm open to it. I'll add it to my list. So if you found this helpful, share it with a friend, more than likely somebody that does struggle with porn addiction. And again, leave that comment, subscribe, all the good things. Hit that bell icon. Just kidding, you don't have to. People say that all the time, so I just had to say it. Hit the bell icon so you can be notified when I do release future content. You guys rock. Thanks for all the support, and I'll talk to you next week.